twofold, I think. First, for what he did in developing Bermuda as an international business center, or as a place to do business, international companies to do business. And secondly, for what he did politically, which was to drag Bermuda into the 20th century and to develop Bermuda constitutionally and see the introduction of universal adult suffrage. I think he wanted to see a prosperous Bermuda. He always believed that Bermuda could only be a success if it had a strong foundation, and a strong foundation was a strong economy. He also recognized, I think, back in the 60s, the need for there to be integration in Bermuda, that segregation had to come to an end, and that, in his words, the two races had to get along and work together. And he made his mark and his effort in that direction. And I think that was his vision for Bermuda, that people would go forward economically together as one community. I'd look at it two ways. Mm-hmm. One, it depends on where you're looking from. If you're now measuring the man 50 years later and what he did, there is a tendency to view things from how we see them today, looking back. Secondly, it's always difficult, I think, to find out what a man's motives were, what his intentions were at the time he did things. And every time we do something, they're open to interpretation. So that's my general comments with respect to how Sir Henry Tucker is viewed. But there is no question in my mind that, as I said initially, that he believed strongly that the only successful Bermuda would be one that is strong economically. That is an economic success story. So to say that he was motivated by economics is true. To say that's his sole motivation and that was his only motivation, I think might be a little unfair and harsh. Looking back, I can see how some people come to that determination. But at the time, and I only say this to put things in perspective, he broke from the status quo back in the 60s. There was an entrenched white dominant, not middle class, but rich class, who wanted to run things and continue to run things from the yacht club and preferred that things can remain separate and not even equal. And that is, they believed in a segregated Bermuda. Sir Henry recognized those days had to end. They were only going to end up in disaster. And so he was prepared to part company from those people, some of whom were family members, and form the United Bermuda Party, as it turned out, to form a coalition with some black members in Parliament, other black members and the rising middle class out there in the country, to form this new group. And at the time, whether people agree or disagree, like it or not, it did capture the attention and the votes of a majority of this company. And that's the country, that's the foundation he built back in the mid-60s and up until his retirement in 72 as government leader.
Many people would be surprised to hear that he wanted to introduce income tax.
I was too at the time. I mean, when I went to interview Sir Henry as a journalist, I was fascinated by him because he cast a giant shadow, even in retirement, over what was happening in Bermuda, economically and politically. It was like that commercial, I forget what firm it is, it says, but when so-and-so speaks, people listen. And I think that was, the case with Sir Henry Tucker, both when he was active and when he was retired, and people listened to what he had to say. And as a result, he had enormous influence. Well, it's the United Bermuda Party is one of them. I think the Bank of Bermuda, although that's now become an international bank and no longer the local bank it was. But I think he's had a hand in the development of Bermuda today, politically and economically. And I think you can see it probably manifest itself in Bermuda's developed as an international business center. I think it's probably progressed to even beyond what he had imagined in terms of insurance and reinsurance business. But I think he always thought that Bermuda's future lay there. He also believed in tourism and Bermuda's attractiveness. And of course, back in his day, when he saw it starting to develop in the 20s and 30s, and at that time Bermuda was attractive because people said that Europe is too expensive, going by ship, and Bermuda emerged that way. But I think more in international business and politically, and what he has been able to achieve, what he was able to achieve in terms of Bermuda's establishment constitutionally. That's not to say that it was the most perfect thing created at the time, but that's the foundation. And what's that expression people use? The house that Jack built.
Yeah.
And I think to a certain extent the House of Assembly as it's comprised today is a development of the house that Jack helped build. Back in the day when I was a journalist, I'm going back to the 70s now, and just a keen reporter, Sir Henry Tucker was a larger-than-life figure within the 20 square miles that are Bermuda. And I'd done a number of interviews with him, and I was fascinated, not just with his knowledge and his perspective, but the way in which other people seemed to deferentially bow to his insights, his experience, and what he had to say. I did an interview with him on the eve of an election here back in '76, I think, when Jack Sharp was premier. And Sir Henry had said in that interview candidly and openly that he thought it would probably be a good thing if the UBP did lose a few seats in order to take, I think, some of the arrogance away that people were complaining about. And this appeared in the newspaper under my byline. Well, as you might expect, the United Bermuda Party reacted very strongly to that, had him come out in a press conference and explain himself. And to his credit, he never retracted that. He didn't say that John Barritt misquoted him or didn't say what I said said. And I rather said, well, here I've got the measure of this man. And I said, fascinated by him. I would like to interview him some more. And I went round to his house on weekends to interview him, and I have tapes of Sir Henry talking about his life. And I was struck by how open he was and how genuine and sincere, and he was interested at the time in talking about it. I was fascinated by the man that, as I say, he cast such a shadow over Bermuda at the time whenever he spoke or he walked into a room. And the interesting thing is that he was so self-effacing. Certainly in retirement, he wasn't a person who bounded into a room and stormed and made people stand to attention. He was quite open and pleasant. Now, that's retirement. I heard back in the day, that in the boardroom or around the cabinet table, he was a very forceful person who, once he made up his mind, you did it his way.